Welcome into Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. Tera Roberts here along with Pat Fitzmaurice and Billy Muzio. And today is our ranking show. We'll be going through the Fantasy Pros ranking tiers for Week 8. Pat and Billy will be providing their thoughts on players in all of the tiers. And there is no better pair to provide analysis on these rankings because Billy was the number 4 overall most accurate in-season fantasy football ranker in 2022. Fantastic. And has consistently done well in our accuracy competition. Fitz was the most accurate in-season weekly ranker in 2020. I cannot explain how difficult that is, and he has been consistently among the most accurate rankers in fantasy football. You can find Billy at FF Muzio, you can find Pat at Fitz_FF, and you can find me at It's Tera Time. So buckle in, get ready, because their insight is going to help you out a ton this week with your fantasy matchups. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll start things off with our top 20 players. Our consensus rankings can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. And you can also see the tiers on the video podcast at youtube.com/fantasypros. Pat, I'm going to start with you. Who really stands out here in this top 20?
It's interesting to see Jahmyr Gibbs at running back 11, Tara, and obviously that's going to change if David Montgomery were to come back this week. I don't think we're expecting that to happen, but maybe it's possible. I personally feel like that is just a little bit too high. Gibbs had 9 catches and 10 targets last week against the Ravens, but that was mostly because the Lions were getting absolutely smashed by the Ravens right from the start in that game, and that was kind of like some of the games we used to see for DeAndre Swift when he was with the Lions. The Lions would fall into a big hole and Swift would wind up getting like 14 targets. Maybe we do see Gibbs get another 20 touches this week against the Raiders. After all, Dan Campbell has said that, as long as Montgomery is out and now that Gibbs is healthy, he's going to be the guy. But I've got him ranked a little lower, running back 14. I'm just not totally sold that he gets this many touches again, especially in a game where the Lions are probably going to be looking at a favorable game script as favorites by more than a touchdown against the Raiders, more of a run-friendly game script. So I don't know if we're going to see that sort of usage in the passing game for Jahmyr Gibbs again.
That's true. That's a really good point. We have seen running backs really thrive in this matchup with the Raiders, so maybe we can see an aggressive workload on the ground. And more than likely going to see a very strong decrease in pass volume from Jared Goff after throwing over 50 attempts. That was kind of crazy. Billy, what kind of stands out here for you in this top 20?
It's nice to see Isaiah Pacheco inside the top 10, who's got a pretty cake matchup here versus Denver, who's given up the most points at the running back position. But we have seen a pretty steady, consistent usage from him from a utilization report standpoint. Happy to see his snaps kind of constantly increasing. He's kind of dominating that backfield in touches and, of course, gets this cake matchup. So I have him inside my top 5. Looks like he's just outside that inside the rankings, but I think he's finally starting to get some respect that he deserves here as we kind of tail off into the end of the season.
Love the bullish rankings on Isaiah Pacheco always. Again, for in-depth analysis on these players, go to fantasypros.com/rankings. And for updated rankings, make sure that you are using our My Playbook app. All right, and we're going to dive into these tiers here and pull out some players here. We're going to start off with the B- tier. We've got 2 players in there, Alexander Mattison and Rachaad White. We do want to pull out Alexander Mattison and talk about him. This one is an interesting one here to have a conversation around because his usage, maybe you guys can talk it out and tell me what your opinions are, whether or not the increase in volume for Cam Akers is going to stick here. I mean, Mattison was productive on the ground. He was kind of limited, unfortunately. So ECR has him at RB21. Pat, you've got him at RB19 there, but a little bit more positive. And Billy, you've got him at RB29. Billy, I'll start off with you. Why are you a little bit more out on Cam Akers this week?
Yeah, it breaks down to the utilization. We're seeing a shift here in rushing attempts. We're seeing a shift in routes. We're seeing a shift in targets. I think all said and done, the needle is pointing down for Alexander Mattison and his usage, whereas what he was dominating in the touches prior to Cam Akers arriving. And even quite frankly, Ty Chandler has gotten a little bit more involved inside of these categories as well in the last couple of weeks. But last week in particular, we saw Alexander Mattison only with 38% of the rushing attempts. In prior week, we saw 82%, 47%, 74%, 87%, 89%. So Cam Akers definitely started starting to eat into those totals. From a route standpoint, Cam Akers ran 21% of the routes and Alexander Mattison ran 38%, but in comparison, 47%, but in comparison, 55% the week before, 38, 43, 53. So we are seeing this number down as well. Targets, only 7% in targets last week for Alexander Mattison, where prior to that, 23% in week 6, 7, 6, 13, 12, all double digits from weeks 1 through 3, and Cam Akers starting to eat into that. So if we see this utilization consistently, I should say dipping down, this is where we're going to see Mattison's fantasy points do the same, because he hasn't been the most efficient runner season to date. We were purely relying on him from a usage standpoint. And if we can't rely on that, then we can't rely on him from a fantasy perspective either.
Pat, what are your thoughts?
So we saw Mattison. It looked like he might have got dinged up at the end of that 49ers game, and I wonder if that's maybe why Cam Akers was getting a little more run late in that game. But one thing I've noticed about Mattison, it's sort of interesting in games where the Vikings have played Super Bowl caliber opponents, the Eagles, Chiefs, and 49ers. Mattison has finished with fewer than 10 carries in each of those games. It's almost as if the Vikings are resigned to not being able to really effectively do business on the ground and know they have to throw to keep up with those teams. So, and it's not like it was all about negative game script, because in all of those games, those were all one-score games. And the Vikings even won one of them against the 49ers. Sorry, Billy. I know you're a 49ers fan. But in all the other games, Mattison has had double-digit rushing attempts, 11 against the Buccaneers, 20 against the Chargers, 17 against the Panthers, 18 against the Bears. And as much as I hate to admit this, Tera, Minnesota's Week 8 opponents, the Packers, are not Super Bowl caliber. So, the Packers ranked 26th in DVOA against the run and have given up the third most fantasy points per game to running backs. Mattison, all in all, 15.7 touches a game and a pleasing matchup this week. So I think he's a pretty appealing play. I think he belongs in RB2 territory.
I was going to ask, so I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, the matchup here feels like I agree with Billy about the Cam Akers working in, but then you look at the matchup against Green Bay and you kind of say, okay, I can still get on board here with Alexander Mattison being a little bit more successful on the ground. We saw the Denver running backs have success. Even Javonte Williams, it's the best he had ever looked all season long against that Packers defense. So I do feel like there's a little bit of upside there. We're going to move on to here our C plus tier with Javonte Williams, Gus Edwards, and Ramondre Stevenson. Any of these guys kind of feel like they're misplaced, or is this about right for these guys? Pat, what are your thoughts?
Seems like it's about right. Guys sort of on the border of start-sit territory. And, as much as I want to embrace Javonte Williams, he's still part of a three-man backfield now. Jaleel McLaughlin has passed Samaje Perine, but Perine is still getting snaps too. So even though Javonte is clearly the number one guy in this committee, it's still a committee.
Billy, we see Ramondre Stevenson here, who's looked better, had better numbers over the past couple of weeks, but I think we'll dive into that New England backfield a little bit more later. Is this a good place for him?
Yeah, I think these guys are all priced appropriately. Any given week, they could score, they could get extra usage, goal line carries, they could get extra targets, but it's just not something that we can rely on consistently from this group, and so I think they're priced accordingly.
All right, before we move on to the next tier, who are the pretenders? Who are the contenders? We are halfway through the NFL season, but DraftKings Sportsbook is still pumping out unbeatable offers every single game. New customers can bet just $5 on anything to get $200 instantly in bonus bets. DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of a sweetener offer every single game this October. Maybe you want to take a chance on a guy like Alexander Mattison in a good matchup against Green Bay. You can do that on DraftKings. Now, get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Download the app now and use code FantasyPros. New customers can bet just $5 on anything to get $200 instantly in bonus bets only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code FantasyPros. The crown is yours. All right, guys, we're going to move on to the C tier here. And this is a big tier. I feel like this is always a big tier here. It's the guys that could be something, and this one is going to be a fun one for us to do. So we're going to pull out several players in here. We've got Brian Robinson, Darrell Henderson, Dameon Pierce, Kareem Hunt, Chuba Hubbard coming off of the bye week there with Miles Sanders. That one's a little shaky. Najee Harris coming off of a strong game. Zach Moss, Jalen Warren, and Emari Demercado working his way up in the rankings after theoretically becoming the RB1 in Arizona. So let's start off in this tier and we'll talk about Darrell Henderson coming straight off the street last week and becoming the Rams RB1. It's a fantastic Cinderella story. ECR has him at RB27. Pat, you are right there with ECR. RB27, and Billy, you've got him at RB37. Pat, I will start off with you. Sell us positively on Darrell Henderson as the lead back again for the LA Rams.
Yeah, the retread, but I think the reason he stepped right in and immediately played 57% of the snaps in his first game for the Rams this season, and the reason why Henderson will continue to get a majority of the snaps for the Rams is that Sean McVay trusts him as a pass blocker. It's that simple. And I think that is why Cam Akers blew up in our faces. Well, at least he blew up in my face last year when I thought he was going to have a nice season for the Rams. Akers is a poor pass blocker. Henderson is a good pass blocker. And that is why he is going to continue to play a lot while Kyren Williams is out and play ahead of Royce Freeman. I don't think Henderson is much more than a straight ahead, no frills runner. But the secure touch volume, I think, is enough of a reason to rank him as a running back 3. I think that gives him low level fantasy value for us this week. So I think he's startable and like flex worthy. I don't think he's likely to get 100 yards rushing this week, but I do think he could give us 75 and maybe fall into the end zone.
I like it. I am back on the Darrell Henderson train. Happy for him. Billy, tell us on why we should not be back on this Darrell Henderson train. Is it Royce Freeman? It's crazy, this backfield. Is it Royce Freeman that we're scared of? What is the downside here to Darrell Henderson?
So I have his name circled on my sheet this week as somebody who's most likely going to move up. As of right now, I have Gaskins penciled in for some touches this week, who came in not knowing the offense, inactive last week. If he is active, I think we do need to take that in consideration because Gaskins is actually a pretty good pass catcher and probably get some rushing attempts as well. And so right now, the ranking's a bit of a hedge until I get a little bit more information out of the Rams camp to see if he's going to be active or inactive. That being said, while Pat was talking, I punched in the numbers as if he was inactive, and he moves all the way up to RB26 in my rankings. So I do think that that's probably where he'll settle based upon what we saw last week if the usage remains the same. Darrell Henderson dominated the touches, 60% of the rushing attempts on the ground. He saw all the targets pretty much out of the backfield except for Ronnie Rivers needing a couple. So I do think that Henderson himself is going to continue to be utilized as the lead back in the absence of Kyren Williams. And I do think that we can lean on him pretty comfortably as a high-end RB3 if Gaskins is inactive.
You make a really good point there. Miles Gaskin could come in, and this would not be the first time. We've seen it multiple times this season where a back looks like the lead back, and then all of a sudden there's a flip to another guy who is getting pushed up for a little bit of opportunity. So it makes sense. It's possible that, with a week under his belt, we could see a little bit more of Miles Gaskin. We're going to keep on this retread target, as Pat mentioned, and we're going to go back and talk about Kareem Hunt, who is looking like the old Kareem Hunt. Had a strong week 6, had a strong week 7, got the touchdown. We saw some contributions from Pierre Strong, but it really looked like the valuable touches there and the receiving upside was really going to Kareem Hunt. So we've got ECR with him at RB30, at RB29. Pat, you've got him at RB33. Billy, you've got him at RB25. This is fun. You guys are on opposite ends of the spectrum here. So this will be a good little debate here. Billy, I'll start off with you. When we're talking about Kareem Hunt, are you in a little bit more? Are you thinking that he's going to get the strong bulk of the workload here?
I do think he's going to get the bulk of the workload. I think Jerome Ford, of course, when he was active, was seeing everything. Pierre Strong, I think, is the better back at this point in his career than where Kareem Hunt currently is. Kareem Hunt's utilization is what's going to save him right now. But if we continue to see right now, I'm projected for roughly 48% of the rushing attempts. And I definitely want to see more what's happening from the news inside of practice this week. But I think it's pretty safe to say we saw early reports saying that he was going to receive the bulk of the carries, but Pierre Strong is the more explosive back. That being said, passing game wise, I don't think they can trust Pierre Strong in pass protection. So Kareem Hunt will probably see all of the third downs, which was where the value is going to come from. Last week, we saw him with 3% of the targets. I think that's probably going to increase here this week, as we know that Jerome Ford is going to be out, where Jerome Ford last week saw 12%. So I think we can get closer to that 10% number for Kareem Hunt. It gets him inside RB2 territory for me.
Any concerns for you around the potential absence of Deshaun Watson and how that affects this? Are they, it could be a good thing. They rely on the run, but then it could be a bad thing like we saw previously where the team could just say, we're going to stop the run and force the pass. And then the running backs just simply don't have an opportunity.
I think that this offense is going to be fine without Deshaun Watson. I had a lot of concerns of Watson going into the season. It's kind of playing out that way. He just has not looked the same as he did when he was in Houston. I think that Deshaun Watson is long gone. We're never going to see him again. And I think right now these inefficiencies are actually hurting this offense. PJ Walker was actually pretty good in his last start. We saw a similar instance in New York with Tyrod Taylor in the absence of Danny Dimes, where the offense actually moves when the backup comes in because things are just clicking a little bit differently. So I think that if Walker gets to start, I think it's actually going to help Kareem Hunt because whenever we see a quarterback who is maybe under duress or struggling or wants to move the ball, they use the running back as an outlet. So that's where we can start to see those touches in the passing game go up for Kareem Hunt. And of course, if they're struggling to move the ball to the field, they're going to lean on the run game. And so I do think that from a utilization standpoint, if Watson's out, I think it's going to help Hunt this week.
Pat, you're a little further back on ECR than ECR on Kareem Hunt.
Yeah, after Jerome Ford got hurt last week, we saw Pierre Strong have more touches and snaps than Kareem Hunt. So Strong played a little bit more. I don't necessarily think that Strong has leapfrogged Kareem Hunt on the depth chart or anything like that. I mean, we did see Kareem Hunt actually start ahead of Jerome Ford 2 weeks ago. It was just kind of a just for the first play or two. But Hunt has been dealing with some sort of thigh issue, and that was probably part of the reason that a guy who didn't go through training camp this year, maybe the Browns are just being a little bit judicious with his management, but they might do that again this week. I think it could be something close to a 50-50 or maybe a 60-40 in Hunt's favor. So I have Hunt at running back 33 and Strong at running back 41. I think they're both going to be involved. And by the way, remember how last season, you guys, the Seattle Seahawks were this really bad run defense that we were targeting in DFS and with our matchup decisions? Not really the case anymore. The Seahawks have allowed the 14th fewest fantasy points to running backs, and their run defense ranks third in DVOA right now. So this is no longer a matchup to be exploited, which is why I'm not all that enthusiastic about Kareem Hunt or Pierre Strong this week.
That's a very good point. The Seattle defense was dealing with injuries earlier in the year, and as a whole, they've been a lot better recently now that they've got a whole bunch more players back healthy. We're going to move on to the next player here. We're going to talk about Najee Harris. RB 31. Pat's got him at RB 30. Billy, you've got him at RB 23. This will be fun. He's coming off of a game where he kind of reasserted himself there. Looked better. And Billy, talk to us. Is this something that we can buy into? Is Najee back?
God, I hate that I'm always defending Najee.
I do it too.
I don't want to defend Najee. I don't like Najee. I don't know why he continues to pop up higher in my rankings, and I got to manually move him down. It's something that I need to take a look at the algorithm because I don't like this algorithm right now. But not in the faith of debating here, I will continue on with defending Najee. 50% of the rushing attempts last week. Jaylen Warren saw a downtick at 21% versus kind of consistently 30%. We did see a bit of increase in targets last week from Najee as well at 13%, where that was typically dominated by Jaylen Warren, who had seen near 15 to 20% almost every single given week throughout the season. But the last couple weeks, weeks 5 and 7 for them, because they had the bye week 6, there has been a shift in the guard, at least in targets for Jaylen Warren, kind of getting consistently under 10% now. I don't know what this offense, if they're going to maybe change the way it's looking, because all those Jaylen Warren targets were there when Deontay Johnson was out. So maybe the healthy Deontay Johnson changes how they look at Jaylen Warren and his usage, which then from there they maybe lean a little bit more on Najee Harris as the 1-2 down back and getting him more involved inside of the passing game. So they're not signaling what they're doing as much when they insert Jaylen Warren. So I think that's going to be my defense today with Najee. Again, I'm not super confident in where I have him in the rankings, and I think that you could argue pretty much anywhere from, back end RB2 to high end RB3, I think is kind of where he's going to settle in the rankings.
I think that is a perfectly reasonable defense for him. I do it all the time too. The Deontay Johnson one is a really good point. I think him coming back in there, we think of it in terms of how it affects George Pickens. How does it, well, unfortunately not Pat Freiermuth, but how does it affect Kenny Pickett? We're not really thinking about it of how does this actually affect the running backs as well, because it changes things up in terms of those short passes. So I love that point right there. Pat, you are right on line, really. Just one off of ECR with Najee. Are you feeling like a little bit skeptical around the resurgence, theoretically, of him?
Yeah, just a little bit. And by the way, I think the dirty little secret is that Najee Harris actually designed Billy's rankings algorithm. So that's why he keeps popping in that. Yeah, so I mean, I guess the Jaylen Warren backfield takeover is not happening after what we saw last week with Najee out snapping Warren 34-27 and now touching him 17-7. And Billy makes a really good point about the Deontay return and what that might mean for Warren in this offense. But I guess my skepticism is largely about the matchup and just, the Jaguars have only allowed, the fourth fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs and only 3.4 yards per carry. So, I think Najee's value is going to be touchdown dependent. Hadn't really been scoring touchdowns until he finally got it into the end zone last week. So, I'm just I still think Najee is more of an RB3 than an RB2.
Makes sense. I mean, the matchup is one that's very interesting. I've been trying to debate within myself, trying to figure out, is the run defense good or is the pass defense just horrible to the point where people just say, we're just going to throw it. What's the point of running it on the Jacksonville Jaguars? So this will be interesting to see how he performs in this matchup. This is a good barometer in terms of people that are looking for Najee in terms of maybe a trade target, rest of season, what's this look like? And maybe we can use this matchup right here to really determine the path for him moving forward. We're going to hit on one more player in this tier. I told you this, we're still in the C tier. I told you guys that the C tier was one that we had to have a ton of discussion around. And one more that we got to talk about. This is fun. We've talked about Darrell Henderson. We've talked about Kareem Hunt. And now you've got all of these guys in this tier that are pushing themselves to prominence. And we've got a new guy here that is pushing himself back into prominence. Emari Demercado stepped up and became the RB1 after the week where everybody, you didn't dump your fag, but you went out there and you acquired him. You thought that this was going to be it. And then he got the smallest amount of utilization in the offense in week 6 and then came back in week 7 and asserted himself as the RB1, a single carry between the other running backs. Let's talk it out here with Emari Demercado and how much we can or cannot trust this. He's checking in at RB34 on ECR. Pat just slightly behind in terms of your ranking with RB37. Billy a little bit more pro Emari Demercado there at RB28. Pat, I will start off with you. Are you buying into him as the RB1, or is this more so that you're just not buying into the Arizona run game as a whole?
I think it's the latter, Tera. The Cardinals did sort of swerve us with their usage in week 6, making us think that Demercado was maybe not going to have that big a role or that this was going to be a full-blown committee. Then they go out and give him an 80% snap share in week 7 and, 17 touches, 13 carries, 5 targets, 4 catches. The thing is, Demercado's 17 touches resulted in 75 yards and 0 touchdowns. And now the Cardinals are facing a Ravens defense that ranks number 1 in DVOA and number 7 in DVOA versus the run. I don't think your odds of getting a touchdown out of Emari Demercado this week are very good, and I don't think the odds of us getting 80-plus yards out of him are very good. So while I do trust that he is probably going to still be the lead running back for the Cardinals, I just don't necessarily think that equates to much fantasy value.
Billy, how about you? You're more in on Emari Demercado. He looked good. Yards per carry, fine. He's got receiving upside. Should we be buying into him a little bit more?
I think a little bit more. You never know what Jonathan Gannon's going to do with his running back roulette. Definitely to Pat's point, has made it less than ideal in terms of projecting and trying to pick a starter if you have any of these running backs. But that being said, Demercado has been effective inside of the passing game. Last week he did see 5 targets. He caught 4 of them. Only 17 yards, so nothing to really hang your hat on. But one thing that Pat mentioned, everything Baltimore's good against the run, but they have given up the 10th most receptions to running backs this year. So I do think if we're going to see Demercado get going, it's going to be in the passing game. We expect this game script to be in the passing game favor for Arizona. They're going to have to throw the ball to kind of keep up with Baltimore. We just saw what Baltimore did to Detroit last week. And I think that if they're going to want to hang around, they're going to have to utilize these backs inside of the passing game as well. Demercado, of course, I think the most talented back of the remaining 3 that are inside Arizona. And so this is what I thought was going to happen in week 6, quite frankly, and it just didn't happen. I was bullish and left him there last week in week 7 saying, I think the coach is going to figure it out sooner rather than later. And if not, then I think we just cut him, and because Connor's going to be back sooner rather than later. But I do think Demercado is going to be involved enough from a utilization standpoint and in the passing game to be relevant this week.
I like it. All right, we're going to move on to, we're finally out of the C tier. I told you we're going to be in the C tier forever because there was so much that we had to cover there. We're going to move on to the C minus tier where you've got Miles Sanders, Rashawn Johnson, Tyler Algier, A.J. Dillon, a group of guys whose backfields are kind of interesting in terms of being potentially shared. Are there any guys in here that you feel like will really step out and have a highly productive game in here? Pat, I'll start off with you.
Oh, man. Like A.J. Dillon conceivably could because he's getting a lot of work, but this Vikings run defense has actually become pretty good. So I'm a little skeptical about that he'll be able to, get a lot done on the ground. And we know he's not going to give you a lot of explosive runs. So, other than that, there's not a lot of optimism in this tier, to be honest. We just don't know what the Miles Sanders workload is going to look like anymore. I mean, there's total ambiguity there, and maybe Chuba Hubbard has even passed him up in the Carolina backfield.
Yeah, maybe the same situation with Rashawn Johnson. If he comes back, Foreman coming off of 2 strong games, we don't 100% know how that's going to look. Billy, anyone here stand out to you?
I was going to mention Rashawn Johnson. If he's able to clear concussion protocol, I would like to see what his involvement is going to look like. I think that he was dominating touches when he was active, and Foreman was constantly inactive. But to your point, he's had a pretty productive past couple weeks. So the guard may have shifted here, and Rashawn Johnson may just continue to be the backup. But he could be an interesting player, someone that you might need a home run play out of in the flex, and could potentially take on more workload. I know Foreman got a little banged up towards the end of that game as well, and we just don't know how this is going to look. But Rashawn Johnson could be an interesting play.
Then we've got the D plus tier with Justice Hill and Devin Singletary, very small tier. And the D tier, we've got Jaleel McLaughlin, Tajay Spears, Ezekiel Elliott, Royce Freeman, Latavius Murray, and Pierre Strong. We've talked about a couple of these guys here, but the one that we want to pull out here and have a conversation around is Ezekiel Elliott. This one is one he's a very frustrating back for fantasy managers because he's taken away from the Ramondre Stevenson fantasy managers that need those goal line touches. And then he's not getting enough to really make you feel comfortable to plug him into a starting lineup. But let's talk it out here and see who is feeling more comfortable this week with Ezekiel Elliott. ECR has him at RB 43. Pat has him at RB 39. Billy has him at RB 34. Your you're both feeling more comfortable. You're both feeling like you're hopping back on the Ezekiel Elliot train. We talked about Kareem Hunt and Darrell Henderson and joked that we were going back to 2019. But are we seeing the resurgence here of Ezekiel Elliot? Billy, I'll start off with you.
Resurgence is a strong word, but involvement, I'd say we can talk about. He's been more involved than maybe fantasy managers want to admit, and of course, more than Ramondre Stevenson owners want to see. But he has finished as a top 34 running back for the past 3 weeks. Week 5, RB 34, week 6, RB 18, and last week, RB 24 in half point PPR. We are consistently seeing him kind of in that 37 to 50% rushing attempt range. Last week, he actually saw more rushing attempts, rushing percentage than Ramondre Stevenson, from 50 to 41%. We are seeing him, become more active in the passing game as well. Last week, not so much, but we have seen him eclipse the double-digit target percentage on multiple occasions this week. So this week they get Miami. Miami's given up the 15th most fantasy points to the running back position. We do expect them to probably trail in this game, and we probably see a little bit more usage in the passing game from both backs. But that being said, we can count on Ezekiel Elliott seeing some of the goal line carries if they do get into the goal line. Always falls forward, one of his benefits of why he's been so dependable inside the red zone. And so I do think that inside the top 36 is a pretty good bet for Ezekiel Elliott this week.
Pat, how about you?
Boy, this really is the nostalgia episode of the ranking show with talk about Kareem Hunt, Darrell Henderson, Ezekiel Elliott. Not that I'm excited about putting Zeke into my starting lineup this week, but if you are desperate, if you're getting hit with running back injuries, as a lot of people are, he's averaging 9.6 carries a game over the Patriots' last 5 games, and he's found the end zone in back-to-back contests. So maybe there is some low-level appeal here if you're really up against it at the position. But this is a split backfield, and Ramondre is still 1A here. And while Zeke has gotten at least one target in every game this season, he is averaging 3.5 yards per target, which is just not a good number at all. So, there's some appeal here, but very low-level appeal, I would say.
Sometimes we got to dive deep into these types of running backs. We've got deep leagues, we've got injuries, people are reeling. So it helps to pull out some of these names sometimes to know who you could potentially turn to. And maybe Zeke is one of those guys if you're in a deeper league. All right, the D- tier has Jeff Wilson and Craig Reynolds. And then the F tier has Elijah Mitchell and Jamal Williams. Again, these are guys where they're backups. They're, potential dart throws if you have to, but we're getting into those lower tier options. We're going to move on to another game, but before I dive into that, fall is officially here, and that means it is my favorite time of year, the time for tailgating, and the only thing better than tailgating is tailgating with Miller Lite. Miller Lite is the 96-calorie beer that tastes like beer and is perfectly brewed for everything fall has to offer. Miller Lite is the perfect light beer for all beer lovers. As soon as you take your first sip, that day, the food, the conversation, the tailgate, everything just gets instantly better. Whether you're tailgating at the game like me or watching the game at home, live those autumn moments with Miller Lite and let the great taste of Miller Lite hit your taste buds so hard you feel it in your heart. With a Miller Lite in hand, autumn doesn't just taste great, it tastes like Miller time. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/FantasyPros. That's MillerLite.com/FantasyPros. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. All right, we're going to close things out here with a Who Would You Rather game. In this first one, it is very interesting. This is one that people debate constantly. I know it. I've seen it 1,000 times. It is Rachaad White or Javonte Williams. Who are we going with this week? Pat, I'll start off with you. Who would you rather?
I'm going to follow the volume here, Tera. Rachaad White is averaging 17.5 touches a game, and granted, he is only averaging 3.2 yards per carry right now, but he's going against a shaky Buffalo Bills run defense that's giving up 4.9 yards per carry to opposing running backs. White is also productive as a pass catcher. 22 catches on 23 targets. So only one target for Rachaad White has fallen incomplete. And he's averaging 7.1 yards per target, which is really good for a running back. I like Javonte, but again, that is a three-man backfield. And while Javonte is number one, the other guys are going to get snaps too. So I'll take Rachaad White here.
Billy, how about you? Who do you prefer?
Yep. This is a pretty easy selection for me. I agree with Pat. It's Rachaad White. He's seeing roughly 80% snaps consistently on a week-to-week basis, dominating the rushing attempts, dominating the targets of the backfield. There's just no one really that's competing with any touches for him. Got to follow the volume here. And even if it hasn't been efficient, he's still getting it. And with volume, we know that volume is king in fantasy football, and we're going to want to follow that. So bound to get a touchdown at some point. And I do think that Buffalo is beatable on the ground. They've given up the 8th most fantasy points to the running back position. And they have actually given up the 7th most targets to the running back position. And as Pat said, he does this well inside of the passing game.
Volume is king. Couldn't have said it better myself. And then matchups are critical. Javonte just doesn't have a good one. The Chiefs' defense has been very good this season. Next, who would you rather? We're going to go with Latavius Murray versus the Bucs, or Devin Singletary versus the Panthers. This one is interesting here because there's a lot of people that had myself. I had to plug in a league Latavius Murray because of all bye week issues. Obviously did not pay out, but I had to do it. No other option. But this week, who would you rather? Latavius Murray or Devin Singletary? Billy, what's your preference here?
I think I'm going to go Devin Singletary, though. It feels dirty, but I think I'm going to lean into it. Prior to the bye, we saw a change in the guard with Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce, where for the first time all season, we saw Devin Singletary out-snap Dameon Pierce. He also saw 40% of the rushing attempts, and targets saw 8%. So, I'm going to kind of lean into that usage a bit. I don't expect it to continue week in and week out, but if we can even see just a 40% to 50% snap range and kind of be that 1B to the 1A, I think that Devin Singletary could become pretty flex worthy on a week-to-week basis with that usage.
Pat, which one are you going with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going Singletary too, and I don't know if the Singletary usage uptick sticks. I mean, it's possible that maybe after the Texans watched Dameon Pierce sort of burn out last year as a rookie, really effective out of the gate, slowed down, hit the rookie wall. Maybe they're just trying to manage his workload a little bit and make sure that doesn't happen again, but pristine matchup for Devin Singletary this week against the Panthers. The Panthers rank dead last in DVOA against the run, and by a wide margin. They've given up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, just a tick behind the Denver Broncos, who, obviously had that huge game where they just let every Miami running back run all over them. I think Larry Zonka came back to have 100 yards in that game against the Broncos. And the Panthers are giving up 5.3 yards per carry to opposing running backs. So Singletary and Latavius Murray basically have the same sort of roles. They're both active number 2 running backs who get decent usage, but give me the one who has the far better matchup.
Makes sense. All right, reminder, guys, if you want a chance to win a glorious fantasy football championship belt for your league, courtesy of our good friends at Trophy Smack, the #1 destination for epic fantasy football trophies, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below on this video, and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can claim your prize. All right, that wraps things up for our running back rankings. If you have any questions about lineups or trades, we are live each and every Thursday on YouTube at 3 p.m. EST, 12 p.m. PST, taking your questions. And if you want to see more advice from Pat and check out his rankings, go to fantasypros.com/fits. And make sure that you also check out Billy's work on Player Profiler as well. It is excellent. You can find Billy at FF Muzio. You can find Pat at Fitz_FF. And you can find me at It's Tera Time. For Pat Fitzmaurice, for Billy Muzio, I'm Tera Roberts. Thank you for tuning in.